Welcome, Chief. It's been a while since we got together. I just went back and looked at our episodes, and it was from episode 11 back in 2020 when we last get together. 4 years. Lots of things have happened since then, and I'm sure we've got lots to talk about. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And before we get started, just let's talk about your family. How are you doing? How's your family doing? How are things at home?
First off, it's my pleasure and thank you for the invitation. I look forward to the discussion. As I did 4 years ago. My family's doing great. We're blessed. We're in a season now where our kids are all adults, and three of them still live with us, but they're doing their adult stuff. You can see they're moving into that phase where they're going to be on their own, married, and hopefully not too soon, but soon enough, grandkids. Right?
Yeah.
Tracy and I are very blessed and starting to enjoy our adult life back again with the kids doing their own thing more and more. So
That's great. I'm glad it's good when your family is doing good. That's one less thing you have to worry about. And you're still chief today, 4 years later, and that must be good to be still here at Kent City of Kent.
yes, it's very good. Most of your listeners are probably not aware that the average tenure of a chief is 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
And I've got six under my belt now. So I feel very fortunate that is the case. And I still feel that there's a lot of work that I want to get done. I see some things we went through, we'll talk about the last 4 years. But now that we're coming out of that, there's a refocusing on some longer term goals that I had that I'd like to see come to fruition.
That's great. So let's get right into it. So in 2020, we were in the middle of what I call the racial awakening. The George Floyd issues and the protests were all going on around the country. Some started in Seattle, ended up here in Kent. A couple of protests as well. We were in the middle of a pandemic and wearing masks and immunizations and all of those kinds of things. Trying to feed people up the hill here at the church. We're trying to feed about 500 people a week who were without able to provide for their families. Have you seen things change, and have you think we made any progress?
Yes to both of those. I felt like that entire period was constant change
Mm.
on multiple fronts. I think the way that we lived, the way that we interacted as human beings, our ability to gather and worship, the growing need for people in our community and how that went. And then also obviously a big part of my perspective is the constant change in law enforcement. And so I feel that coming through that, not necessarily a pleasant experience for a lot of that.
Mhm.
Looking back, absolutely necessary for us to be where we are now, where I feel we were in a much better position than we were in terms of meeting the needs.
Okay, let's get into that. We talked back then in episode 11 about your views on policing and why my question was why you thought some of the things in the country were happening the way they were. It seems to be not unique to any one community. And you had some pretty strong views on policing back then. Have your views changed or have they matured?
No, I would say they've matured. My views have not changed, and the values of law enforcement have not changed. The values of service, integrity, and professionalism are there. It is now the way that we make those things present in our community, go about ensuring that we're living up to those values that the community expects of us. It's been operationalized in a way that comes through so that we are not just relying on our good name in law enforcement. We're actually demonstrating that we're living up to those values. My views haven't changed. Some of my views have been actually more solidified, if you will. I believe for a very long time that the authority that's granted law enforcement from the public has to be given to those that are worthy of it, those that have the right temperament, personality, compassion for people, in addition to courage to stand and be in a way to protect people. And when we don't invest right in the training and development of our law enforcement officers, recruit and retain the brightest people in our community, you can see how the stress of this type of job can result in tragedy.
Mm.
I still believe that. I will always believe that, which is why I think we're very blessed here in Kent. Our officers get exceptional training, get exceptional support here.
Mm. So we had at that time we you talked about we had some of the tragedies going on as well, but you talked about some of the things that you've been doing. What are some of the things that you've done specifically in the department since then to try to ensure the things that you just spoke about?
There's been so many things. I'm worried you're not going to have enough time on this podcast, but let me touch on some of the highlights. First, we really took a long, hard look at our operations, our policies, the way we conducted business from top to bottom, and overlaid that with an important focus on were we doing things equitably and without discrimination? Were we serving in a fair and impartial way? Were we allowing our personal biases to permeate how we did things and how we served? And so that was a very long process. I stood up a new position. We have a inclusion officer currently. That's Officer Eric Doherty. He's got college degrees related to this field. He's an exceptional ambassador, and I elevated him to the office of the chief, so he works directly for me.
Mm.
And so he has gone through all of our policies, our hiring procedures, our training, and has really brought that lens and input from the community directly,
Mhm.
along with our longstanding network of community groups that advise us and tell us what we should know and how we should do things. So I would say that we started with our policy and operations. The second part was our hiring. We were like all law enforcement agencies probably in the country, where the demographic hire every year was over 70% white male. And there's nothing on white males, great police officers, but we weren't really living up to the goal of representing our community to the best of our ability. Let's face it, man.
Mhm.
Everybody wants to be a cop,
Right.
right? So it's easy to say, oh, you should look more like your community. A lot of our community won't have anything to do with police
Right.
work. So we have to break through that. But we put huge investments in our recruiting and hiring. We got strong support from the mayor and the council in terms of our salary and benefit package is the best in the state,
Mm.
which makes West one of the best in the country.
Okay.
So we really put our money where our mouth is and went out there. And I'm very proud to look back and see that for 2022 and 2023, over 50% of the people we hired represented communities.
Wow, that's good.
And historic highs in terms of hiring women and really exceptional people. So that's one. And the last thing I'll hit on is that we really elevated our capturing and analysis of to understand we really knew what was going on through our body worn camera programs, through our drone programs, to our fixed cameras, really elevating how intensely we examined and reviewed what our people were doing to ensure they were meeting up to our standards. There, that has opened a lot of things, including working with the union in terms of process and discipline, but also it's opened our eyes to we do some incredible work out there too.
Mhm.
We need to be able to tell that story.
Right.
So
That's the power of data, right? You
yes,
see the good and you see the
see
not
that.
so good and you see the things you need to change
Yeah.
if you look at it objectively and let the data tell the story. But that is powerful. One of the things that has changed also since then, and by the way, to our listeners, it was episode 11 on our podcast where we interviewed Chief Padilla first back in 2020. But since then, at least for some of people of color, the thing that has really happened significantly is that we've had 3 police officers in this country convicted of crimes from murder to assault, whatever, because of their work. And actually, one here recently, just in the city south of us, which to many people are saying that is unheard of. Many people, I heard some people say, I didn't think I would live to see that in my lifetime. Has that impacted how you do your job or how your officers see themselves or even impact recruiting? So you seem to have a pretty great recruiting record as far as diversity is concerned.
Yes. You're referring to Officer Jeff Nelson's conviction for murder just down here in our neighboring city of Auburn. The good news, I think, for us is that as a department did not sit back and either try to dig our feet in to defend how we were doing things. We didn't push back on what was being demanded of us. We took the tack of trying to embrace it and looking for how we could really change the things we needed to change. Um, you mentioned in your statement that many people felt like they'd never see that in their lifetime. Well, I will assure you, many officers felt the same way, but for a different reason. Because, and if you ask our women here, they truly believe because they're doing it that could never happen, right? That an officer to murder someone would never happen, and it has happened. And you're seeing the accountability level go up. And what's changed is there have been some modifications to the law
Mm-hmm.
that change the threshold for being to convict an officer.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to 2021, the standard of proof that the government had to prove to convict an officer was that they had malicious intent. So like that it's an extremely hard mental
Mm-hmm.
state to prove that the officer went into it absolutely just wanting to kill somebody. That's basically who it
Yeah, a
was.
specific legal
Right.
definition. Yeah,
Yeah.
had to
And
be met.
so that got modified to what is now the reasonable officer standard where the officer has to act in good faith.
Mm.
And what we saw recently is that there is a process where the things that lead up to the lethal use of force matter.
Mm-hmm.
So, how the officer responded, did they de escalate the situation? Did they look for alternatives other than using force to remedy the situation? Was a threat immediate? And
Mm-hmm.
was so that it is concrete that yes, everything leading up to that shows that the officer was or was not justified. And so that has changed the way we look at things. If you can imagine, if you're in this profession and one of your colleagues from another agency gets convicted of murder, that gets everybody's attention.
Mm-hmm.
So and I want to say this too, we respect the decision of the court and
Mm-hmm.
how we feel about the outcome of that. I happen to know some of the family members, former Officer Nelson, and I feel bad for her family
Mm-hmm.
as I would feel bad for a family whose father is convicted of murder that I do
Yeah.
know.
It affects more than the
It
officer.
does. Yes, the
Yeah.
family's there, the departments. So I want to say we respect the decision of the court and the rule of law. But I also know that we're studying that. So we've pulled the records.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing a very deep dive on what the prosecutor had to say, what the defense was, what the jury felt, and what their
Mm-hmm.
comments were. And we are in the process currently of developing lessons learned for leadership, lessons learned for protocols and procedures. Because the one thing I want to make sure in terms of answering the question for the officers, which is,
Mm-hmm.
could that be me?
Mm-hmm.
Is here's what you need to know. Arm them with the tools and the information, and they'll be very.
So the challenge we face, I was thinking about this the other day. The challenge we face, and how to say, is nobody in society argues that we don't need law enforcement, right? We need the rule of law, and in order to do that, we need police officers. We need people who are specialists and experts to help us through that process. But then there are times when things happen when people say, this shouldn't have happened, right? We're in this conundrum. We need officers, we need law enforcement, and we need to learn to work together. And so things like that, and it causes everybody to pause and say, wow, this can happen. And we also think about the family of the people who passed away, who died as well.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that you're doing is in this vein of trying to change the community perception and working with the community is, first of all, just for our listeners as well and our viewers, at the time we talked back in 2020, Kent was the ninth most diverse city in the United States. And I looked last week and I think it was like up to 6 or something like that.
Yes, the statistic I saw is 5.
5, okay, 5.
The entire country.
In the entire country. So you have a city that is extremely diverse, right? And that means you have a lot of people there who, and we talked about this in the first episode, you have a lot of refugees, you have people, asylees, people who come from countries where the police are not seen as friends, as neighborhoods, and you're trying to create a neighborhood-friendly police department that represents them, which I commend you for. So one of the things that you started since we talked was Coffee with the Chief.
Yes.
And that's one of your attempts of showing the more humane face of the law enforcement and trying to bridge some of those gaps. So how is Coffee with the Chief going? And are you satisfied you're making progress?
Coffee with the Chief is still going very well. We still have a great attendance. We just had an event up north in our city last week, and it was well attended. But I want to be really upfront. That event draws some of our underrepresented communities, but not many. It's pretty people that have been, what I'll say, just more mainstream in terms of communication and establishment of the city attend those events. There is a program that I think is really making an impact in our community. So when we talked last, I believe you were just starting community immersion law enforcement program.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it has grown. It took a long while. That trust issue made a lot of organizations hesitate getting in partnership with us.
Correct.
But we've been able to break through that. So we started with World Relief. You mentioned asylees and refugees, and our officers were assigned, for people that are not aware of the program, when you get hired as a new police officer in Kent, you get assigned to work with one of these community-based organizations, and you just go and serve. You're assigned to them, they mentor you, you get an indoctrination in working with multiple cultures and ethnicities.
Are they in uniform or not?
No, they're not in uniform.
Okay.
And it's before they get any training whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
Their role is to start serving, because you know me,
Mm-hmm.
one of my biggest things when I hire someone is they have to have a heart to serve.
Right.
And so they're living up to that. So World Relief was first. They got on. They've been awesome. If you remember when the crisis in Afghanistan, we had our officers were showing up at the airport, picking them up, taking them to medical appointments, taking them to their housing. And then, so that's grown. It took a while, but then Vine Maple Place came on board, right? Helping more so with our diverse community there and volunteering. And most recently, we now place our officers with the YMCA.
Okay.
And they spend over 400 hours just serving their community before they ever put this uniform on. That is making a tremendous difference.
Lots of basketball and baseball and playground.
Yes.
Hanging out with kids.
And going to get food runs and clothing, shelter. And it's been incredible. And our partners, like I said, were very hesitant to start, and now their only complaint is we're not able to provide them as many officers.
Oh,
because we've gotten caught. The other good thing is we've gotten caught up in when we stabilized our hiring. We're one of the few departments anywhere that has all their positions filled.
oh, you have okay, that's great.
But
That is great.
the other side of that, and I want to be clear, we're still way understaffed.
Way
We need another
understaffed.
35 officers.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Yeah, that is a great program. I heard about that, and you talked about it, and my wife talked about it when she worked at World Relief to help launch that program. And I was wondering, how it was going. And do you find that has also given you officers? Let me change the question. How does the officers find it after they go through it? I assume some of them going through it pretty hesitant, but
Yeah, I think most of our young people are very excited. We were launching the program and developing it. One of the concerns we had was how would it impact our recruitment?
hmm
Because let's be honest, most people don't get in law enforcement to go volunteer at my neighborhood. Right? But it really is a component, like I said, to, to now live the values and not just say we
hmm
have them. It has turned into being people.
Wow.
Many of our young people say, this was a deciding factor for me to come to Kent that you do
hmm
this because it shows who you. So that's been excellent. The University of Washington has conducted 2 rounds of studies on this. The second one is being completed now. The initial study showed that the officers both felt like it enhanced their competency
hmm
in the DEI space, and it also was a fulfilling and enrichment thing that they personally did.
Wow.
I expect that this second survey will report
For us.
100%.
And I'm here thinking also from the civilian standpoint, it also establishes relationships with community members before they even put the uniform on that they may encounter then when there are officers. And like we talked about in the first episode we did, the need to have that pre-existing relationship before a crisis happens, especially in those diverse communities where there's that fear of the uniform. Now it seems to me like this is helping in terms of some people have actually met this person who they're now going to see in a uniform and, oh, I know you played with my kids at
Yeah, yeah.
the YMCA, or you picked me up at the airport when I first came here. And so the fear that I can't trust this person, now they're seeing the person rather than the uniform because of that pre-established relationship. To me, that's powerful.
That is at the core.
Yeah.
That officer that's playing soccer at the YMCA this week, and years from now, and that kid who was 6 is now 16,
hmm
and they're in the community. That connection is there.
That
They're gonna
connection is
remember
there.
it.
Yeah. See, that's a powerful thing. I'm going to look forward to that University of Washington study and see how it comes out. So let's change a little bit and say we are in a different world right now. We started on that premise, and, and we have a whole bunch of new challenges now. And we're not saying that the racial issue has been completely solved or the pandemic issue, we think it's been solved, but now they said there's a new strain and a new vaccine. I don't think that'll ever be gone. But we're facing some new challenges right now in the community. What are some of those current challenges that you're seeing right now that are occupying a whole bunch of your time?
The main thing that is front and center right now is the explosion of violent crime with youth offenders and
hmm
youth victims.
Okay.
That is right now at the top and the center of my focus. We There's a lot that goes behind it, and I think we're in the process of recentering some of our systems to address the need. We did a really deep push towards the restorative measures of the offender, interdiction and prevention, which I think are good. And I want to continue to see us work in those efforts. And I think there's room for improvement there in terms of data collection and really making sure we're hitting the mark on helping our youth.
hmm
So that's there. But at the same time, we really moved away from the accountability piece. And none of us, and as a father of 4, want to see any of our youth incarcerated. But I have to tell you, just last week, we had 3 youths. We have now that 3 of them in custody that, for no reason whatsoever, shot and killed a 13-year-old.
Wow.
In the last month in this region, there's been, I think, 6 teens murdered by other teens.
Wow.
And the numbers are pretty staggering. So while we're starting to see a more leveling out with our adult offenders, the youth crime is going through the roof. And so
Mm.
that's a really big challenge right now. To address it, we're in partnerships both with the Regional Gun Violence Reduction Team. We are launching a pilot with the King County Prosecutor's Office specific for Kent. We're with community passageways for the outreach work that needs to be done for the intervention. So we're doing all of that. And at the same time, we're investing in the resources to investigative tools and resources to get out there. So we minimize the time from tragedy to identifying and arresting people. And it sounds horrible, but the Surgeon General called the the homicide rate a health, right? It's a medical messing up the
Yeah.
terms,
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah.
but it's a health problem. And I agree with him. And he
Hmm.
also cited the stat that people, I hope, really pay attention to. The number one cause of death in our youth now is gun violence.
Wow.
There, a teen is more likely to be shot than they are to die in a car accident.
Hmm.
We can't stay this way. So we
Yeah.
really have to examine why it is that we're here and how to address it. And I agree, if it is a health issue, then let's follow what the doctors do. The doctors don't allow cancer to grow. The doctors, they quarantine someone who has an infectious disease, and doctors work to prevent with early testing and intervention.
Good.
And if it is a really a medical crisis, and I agree, we need to look at it that way and make sure we're applying the strategies that doctors use.
Yeah, that is a tragedy. We hear about it every day. Is there any research going on with your department or the university about trying to identify what are some of the reasons that we see in this spike?
Our systems don't capture the social components of why this is,
Social
right? Yeah.
determinants, yeah.
So that work, I know is being done by others. We can, one easy thing to point to is the socioeconomic situations of our city, but anecdotally, what we're seeing is that there's a trend amongst our youth that they feel like they have to have a gun.
Mm.
So where you and I grew up, we have a disagreement at school. We go to the playground, we settle it. A fight's going to
Mm.
remain a fight. In today's youth culture, that fight very rarely remains a fight. That fight quickly becomes a shooting.
As we continue with how things have changed, another item that seems to have changed is the country seems to be really polarized politically and socially now. It seems like the middle ground is getting smaller and smaller, or that's the way it seems.
Yes.
Has that affected your department, or has that some of this political polarization and cultural clashes affected the way you have had to do your work?
I would say that it, like any segment of the population, officers are right
Hmm.
in terms of those polarizing issues. What we really strive for here and what we had to do a better doing, get back to neutrality in that. When you wear this uniform and you have the authority that is granted law enforcement, our role is to stay neutral, right? And stay consistent with laws and the Constitution and not allow our personal biases or political biases to get in there. But they haven't. I think we're leveling out of that. I think we years ago may have focused more on some of the political decisions being driven that become law and moved away from really just saying our job is to make the law work, not to really be upset about we didn't like that law.
Right.
And so I think we matured that way quite a bit. And so we
Mm.
try to keep our officers and our messaging political, political bias and just say, here's how you do your job the right.
Okay. So another issue is immigration and asylum issues. Our election year, and that's front and center. And we've had over the last 4 years lots of debates about immigration, and everybody expected that there would have been a bill to revive the immigration policies of the country, and there was a bill, and then it didn't get support, so it died, and now we're all back to where it is. But people keep coming, and we have these groups that has been bussing people around, and so many things going on. Again, pre-COVID, we never heard about shipping bus loads of people to cities and stuff, so that has also changed. And I'm sure that Kent's not immune from some of those issues of people coming in, people showing up, and trying to figure out how eventually some of it's going to spill onto your plate, because people are going to call and say, hey, chief, what are you doing about this? And
Yes.
these people here and those people there. Have you seen some of those issues that are also creeping up on your door?
Absolutely. And this is going to fall into that category. We could take a whole episode
You're right.
to discuss this. So I'll try to keep it specific. So we have a robust asylum seeker camp on the north side of our city. They're off of Central Avenue. It's been there for a little over a month. The property there is controlled by King County. The refugees is wrong, where the asylum seekers came from the church in Tuckwell, Riverton, and they moved here. And they really thought that if they came here, we would open the hotel for them and they could move in there. And that property is controlled by King County. It's privately owned, controlled by King County. The motel there is owned by the county. And both King County and Kent agree that is not a great location. There's issues with the hotel, but just the location itself and the suitability of that. And mind you, there was no pre-budget for any of this.
Yeah, there never is. Yeah,
right.
People
It's just
show up
unexpected.
Yeah.
And so, what I do want to report is that over 169 people now have been placed in housing. We're trying to continue that, but I also want to be clear that camp is unlawful under city code, and it is against our city use laws as well. But we're doing the compassionate thing. Our officers are in that camp every day doing walkthroughs, ensuring people are safe. We call them welfare checks, checking on the welfare people there. And so we've been doing that. This really comes down to a federal issue. Cities, states, counties are not equipped to do this. It's questionable whether or not the nation is equipped to do this, right? And I won't, this is not a political statement, but I think your audience would appreciate some of the perspective I had. So a few months back, I went with members of the federal law enforcement community and some of the local chiefs here. I'm the chair of the HIDA board. It's high intensity drug trafficking areas. And the purpose of the board is to facilitate operations and task forces to go after the cartels and the drug traffickers and nationwide. So I'm on this board. We're doing a meeting down in San Diego, really to go down there to learn about how San Diego is dealing with the influx of fentanyl. And I found out I was going to learn a lot about the human element of people coming across the border. On my visit there, we sat at the San Isidro border crossing and met and got to go and see. And I was amazed to hear that it's tens of thousands of people just at that one border crossing are coming into the country. And that, yes, fentanyl is coming in. But I literally sat and I watched Chinese people come in, Venezuelans. We watched, I believe they were from Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, come in. And I had lived in San Diego for part of my life. And so I expected we were going to see Mexicans coming across the Mexican border.
Right.
There was still that, but it was a lot of international people coming through the border, which makes you scratch your head.
Oh, so there's
Uh,
a lot more diverse people at the
yes,
border now than when
yes.
you were living there.
And we talked about it, and there was a policy shift to where the agents that work at the border, if they cannot adequately process someone who's seeking asylum, they let them in.
Mm.
So there's criteria based on international law, how
Hmm.
you qualify for asylum, what it means, and that has been overrun because there's not systems to adequately screen people.
Mm.
And so the default is if you can't screen them, let them in. And I really, even if every one of the people coming in to our country and becoming part of our country are good people looking to work hard and do the right things, it dawned on me that this is a capacity and sustainability issue
Hmm.
at the tune of tens of thousands, close to $100,000, sometimes 100,000 people a day coming in our country. I think a legitimate and objective question is, how do we sustain that? How do we pay for it? Even if we could get on board that we all wanted to do the same thing, which we're
Hmm.
not, obviously we're
Right.
polarized,
Right.
just the sheer volume makes me go, how do we even afford to do it?
So they're saying there's about 100,000 people a day.
So at the border crossing we were at, it's in the tens of thousands. So the way the director put it to us was about 50,000 people cross in for work and other things, and about 20,000 go back, or 30,000 go back. They're seeing anywhere from um, 1,200 to 5,000 people come in and seek asylum on certain days. They have the capacity to process 300.
Wow.
And so you see where this is going. There is a significant human smuggling
Right. Human
process that
trafficking
students, we
process.
got to
Yeah.
see the tunnels. I was in the tunnels. We got to see them come on land. And again, our nation was built on immigration. I am here because somewhere, and my great grandfather came and joined
Hmm.
the U.S. Cavalry, and that's how our family got here. We
Mm.
immigrated here. So many of our families. So it is not a departure from the value of immigration and the awesome components of that. For me, it comes down to now just a practical: how do we pay for it? How do we sustain it?
Hmm.
How do we, because that kind of growth is not something that our
Right.
economy is even prepared to keep up with.
Yeah, and I don't think most of us civilian people we hear about immigration and we have our perspective on it, but I'm not sure we truly understand the full magnitude
Magnitude.
of the issue at the borders and what's going on. And I would assume it's probably a little bit different in Arizona from San Diego and at the Canadian border. To get a true picture of what's really happening, it is really difficult to know. And the news tried to do it in 30-second sound bites, and it's not a 30-second sound bite thing, and it's probably not a 15-minute 2020 thing. It's probably a bigger discussion that needs to take place in trying to be responsible and at the same time trying to be compassionate and trying to
Yeah.
be think.
I,
The challenge for a city like yours and for people like me as a minister is when people appear at your door, you've got a situation you got to deal with, right? So you have all the stuff at the border going on that we don't understand. You get a glimpse of it here and there,
right.
but then you wake up one morning and it could be five, it could be 50, it could be 100 people that says we need help, and then you got this situation saying, what do we do about this group that's in front of me right now, right? Which I think is where most people get their touch to it, right? Dealing with that microcosm in front of them at the time.
And what we have learned in our own experience here this last month and a half is that the the scope of the issue is such that when you do help people,
Hmm.
they come, more people go, that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah, the word
Right?
gets
The
out.
words get out. They go here, and these people are compassionate. They'll help you. And Ken doesn't have, I'll be really clear, Ken doesn't have the budget for any of this. None of this exists. And we're talking millions of dollars now
Right.
because you've got to house, feed, clothes, medical. It's a huge deal.
You got
I,
children,
yeah,
school.
exactly. And I didn't touch on this because it is, but it is a thing. I want our community to know. At the same time, there's the humanitarian issue and the sustainability of that. But as the chief of police, I also have to be really cognizant of not every person coming here is going to be good. There are bad actors that will come here. And what is that? How do we guard against that when we don't know who they are?
Right.
There's we don't know who they are. And so that makes us vulnerable. And I think there's room for us to be compassionate and do our part in the world. And by the way, I think other countries should do their part too, but also be wise in ensuring that we're not inviting people that want to do us harm.
Which by the time they get to you, they're, it could be days or weeks or years before. Yeah, so that's one of the polarizing issues now that has changed us, and we're seeing these issues going on in our community. We talked about the gun violence, we talked about the fentanyl issues. Any other thing, any other challenge that you want to highlight?
So this is a good bet. I mentioned that our staffing is stabilized now, which means we filled our positions,
Hmm.
but we only have 167 spots for a city of 100, almost 140,000 people. And so the good news is Kent's done his part to fill its positions. We don't have vacancies, which makes us fairly unique. The bad news is that Washington State ranks at the bottom of staffing per resident in the entire country. We
Wow.
have been at the bottom for over 12 years. This is not a new phenomenon. This is well before George Floyd and defund movement and all of that. It's a real challenge, and we need to find a way to sustain funding for law enforcement officers in our state to increase them.
Mm.
There is not a dedicated statewide funding source. So cities are left to try and figure it out with the resources they have. And cities that are not wealthier, like our city, Kent is not a wealthy city, the revenues just aren't there to do the increase. We have strong support from our mayor and our city council. They are ready to act if given the authority by law, which they don't have,
Hmm.
to increase revenues, revenue stream for law enforcement purposes, but that's not there. So we'll be back in Olympia. We propose legislation to help with this. Hopefully we'll get some attention this year. We didn't any last year. We didn't even
Mm.
get a vote to look at the issue. But why do I bring it up? Number one, it is contributing to the high volume of crime we're seeing in our city. We are reactive because our resources are such that we respond when something goes wrong. If given the resources, what I want to get back to is a preventative presence, community based patrols where we're out and visible more and we're actually deterring crime instead of just responding and engaging in the community. So that comes with an increase of about 35 officers and a about 20 civilian staff. So there's that. The other thing is retention is a big deal.
Hmm.
And Kent's a busy city, and the pace and tempo of which our officers go to calls, our officers handle nearly double the calls, emergency calls in Seattle, Bellevue, Everett, these other bigger cities. Our officers do far more. They go to see far more trauma, and I'm really concerned about burnout.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's an emerging issue for us in terms of just the public safety perspective.
Thank you very much. How's your faith holding up these days?
It's good. It's interesting that for me, during the pandemic and most of that, I got the opportunity to reconnect with my faith and be more regularly attending my church. And because I slipped back a little bit. I wasn't going all the time.
Hmm.
But I got back in there, and it's good. I think attending church is a big component to staying connected, staying growing and hearing the word and being part of the community. I'm a Christian, so Christian community. And it's easy to detach from that. My belief and my faith in God and Jesus has never wavered. My discipline in following what I'm supposed to be doing
Yeah.
is always is something I'm always working on.
Okay. That's great. I'm glad to hear you're holding up because you face lots of different things in your job, and having that community around you that's not necessarily people in your profession is important.
I always welcome prayers, and
We,
so great.
so what recommendations or tools would you have to give to people who may be listening to this and saying, there's so much things going on around us, I don't know what to do. We came through the pandemic, thought we'd have a lull, now we're back up with
Right.
all of these other things, and how am I dealing? How can they find peace and reconciliation and not just always feel like the world around them is about to explode?
I don't know that I'm an expert in this, but what has worked for me is to really try to make time to focus on the things that are going well.
Hmm.
Really focus on the positive things in your family and life, the things that you're working on, the things that you have some control over as well. And be mindful to set aside time to do that, whether it be prayer and meditation, reflection, or even just connectivity with friends and family or a mentor, and focus there. It is easy and almost human nature to look at the negative of everything, and you can really get focused on that. Particularly, I have found if you're spending way too much time on media,
Hmm.
whether traditional media or social media. And so for me, I have to look at social media because I'm the police chief and I have to pay attention to what's going on. But I got to tell you, when I don't have to mess with social media, I don't. I think people get upset. They wish me happy birthday, and my birthday's in March. And sometime around October, I might see it because I don't pay attention to my personal stuff. It's just work related. But, and then also, I would ask people to always ask why and question if they are seeing something. And if it's related to our department, send me an email, call me. We put the good part of social media is that we do put a lot of our communication information out on social media.
Right.
I don't know if that helps, but I think that we are we are a city that benefits greatly from its faith-based community, and as long as we have that, we have awesome faith-based community here. I think we're going to be okay.
Remind our audience just for how they can get in touch with you. You have that uh, website or have that email that people can get in
Sure.
touch with you or the city?
Yes. So if you go into your search engine and just put City of Camp Police, Washington, will come right up. For my email, it's R Padilla, my last name,
Hmm.
Padilla at kentwa.gov. And you can also call our main line, which is 253-856-5800,
Hmm.
and ask for me. I get a lot of emails. I get a lot of phone calls. So give me some time to get back, but I always make it a point to get back to get you to the person that you should be speaking to.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've always been impressed how open you are to speak to people, to talk to people, to respond to emails. Some police chiefs are really hard to get a hold of, but you, as busy as you are, and the things that you got going on, I've always been impressed about how you take the time to show up in places, to respond to emails or phone calls, or like you said, to even make sure people get referred to the right place, and that has from the time we met you, we've always been impressed with your openness to have conversation with people.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Chief. I really appreciate it, and we will get this out there, and hopefully people will learn from what was shared and see that there is hope, that we are improving. The world may be changing, but constantly focus on, like you said, the things we have control of, what is positive. Even the Bible reminds us of that, right? What is just, what is positive. Think on these things and help. And we can all be a help in helping change our community. And it's not always up to law enforcement or the government or the federal government, but part of the issue is what can I do as a regular citizen to help make my community better. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.